I think that our job is to make sure that we take care of the disaster that has occurred.
So you don't agree that it should be abandoned, is that right?
Of course it should not be abandoned.
And you don't think that they should be shamed?
Meat processing in this country. There are heavy USD regulations prohibiting that, as the gentleman from Kentucky has talked to. I'm happy to yield to him in a minute if he would like. We could go sit here for the next 5 days without adjourning. No, don't worry.
In a fiery congressional showdown, Dr. Ben Carson and Congressman Chip Roy dismantled Maxine Waters with unshakable composure and conviction. Carson's calm intellect cut through her condescending remarks like a scalpel, while Roy's fiery rhetoric landed blow after blow. Together, they exposed what many Americans already suspect, that decades of political privilege have produced arrogance, not answers. This wasn't just another hearing. It was a moral clash between truth and corruption. And truth didn't flinch. The silence in the room after Carson spoke wasn't just quiet. It was recognition that something rare had just happened. Accountability, live and unfiltered in the heart of Washington.
Threatened to abandon Puerto Rico recovery efforts. President Trump served notice Thursday that he may pull back federal relief workers from Puerto Rico, effectively threatening to abandon the U.S. territory amid a staggering humanitarian crisis in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. In a trio of tweets, he wrote, "We cannot keep FEMA, the military, and the first responders who have been amazing in Puerto Rico forever." On Thursday, he sought to shame the territory for its own plight. He tweeted, "Electric and all infrastructure was disaster before hurricanes." So you talked about what you, HUD, is doing in cooperation with, I guess, the administration. Do you agree with the president?
I certainly agree that Puerto Rico is a very important territory. The people from Puerto Rico have contributed greatly to the culture of America.
Well, I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is these tweets where the president threatened to abandon Puerto Rico recovery efforts. Do you agree that they should be abandoned, that Puerto Rico should be abandoned?
Well, first of all, as I was saying, Puerto Rico is a very important part of our culture.
No, I know it's
and as a
important, but I
result of
want to
that, we're
know
not going
whether or
to
not
abandon them.
you agree with the president who's threatening to abandon Puerto Rico recovery efforts.
I think I just said I have no intention of abandoning Puerto Rico. They're a very important part of who we are.
So you don't agree with the president? He tweeted, "Electric and all infrastructure was a disaster before the hurricanes," and sought to shame the territory for its own plight. Do you share that opinion?
I think that our job is to make sure that we take care of the disaster that has occurred.
So you don't agree that it should be abandoned, is that right?
Of course it should not be abandoned.
And you don't think that they should be shamed for its own plight, is that right?
There is no question that there have been a lot of difficulties in Puerto Rico. They ended up
Should they be shamed for its own plight?
in debt. I don't think it is beneficial to go around shaming people in general.
Okay, so I'm glad to hear you don't agree with the president. I have serious concerns about the potential conflicts of interest with regard to HUD funds that are contributing to the profits of multifamily developments owned in part by the president and his son.
What unfolded in Congress today was nothing short of a political earthquake. Dr. Ben Carson, one of America's most accomplished men, stood shoulder to shoulder with Congressman Chip Roy, a fearless voice for truth, to hold Maxine Waters accountable. She entered with her usual bravado, confident, combative, and convinced she could corner Carson with loaded questions. But Carson's steady composure turned her theatrics into exposure. Every trap she set collapsed under his logic. Every insult she threw bounced back with quiet dignity. When Carson spoke of failed housing policies, generational poverty, and hollow promises, her narrative began to crumble. Then came Roy, relentless and passionate. He called out her hypocrisy, the homelessness in her district, the broken promises, the outrage without results. His voice echoed through the chamber, reminding America, leadership isn't about volume, it's about value. Together, they shattered decades of political performance in one afternoon.
You think it's appropriate that the president and his family are profiting from federal government funding intended to support low-income families?
If you can give me specific example, I can address that question.
Well, I want to know if you think it's appropriate that the president and his family are profiting from any federal government funding intended to support low-income families.
I don't think it's appropriate for public officials in general to do that.
Okay. Do you stand by the president's decision not to divest himself of his interest in properties that receive HUD funding?
I think the best thing to do is tell me specifically what you're talking about, and then I can address it.
What have you done to ensure that HUD is properly handling these unprecedented conflicts of interest?
Again, if you can tell me what the specific thing is, I can address it.
These properties that are owned in part by the president or Mr. Kushner are also reportedly in very bad condition. You know Starrett City, don't you?
Yes, I know of it.
For example, which is part owned by the president. You know that, don't you?
I do know that he has
And
a
you know it
small
has
part
received
ownership of
increasingly
that.
declining HUD inspection scores. You know that too, don't you?
Do I know what now?
That it has increasingly declining HUD inspection scores.
I know that there are problems there, yes.
But specifically, do you know that Starrett is a problem, that they have received increasingly declining HUD inspection scores? Do you know that?
I know what is necessary to know as the Secretary of HUD regarding that. Do I know all the numbers about Sarah?
No, I don't want you to know all the numbers. All I want you to know is about Starrett. Starrett, everybody kind of knows a lot about Starrett, and it's partially owned by the president. You are the HUD secretary, and you're in a conflict of interest situation. And I just want to make sure you understand what you are overseeing.
Be about basically taking over the government and the government running over.
As the hearing continued, Maxine Waters' mask began to slip. Her interruptions grew desperate, her tone sharper, and her confidence faded fast. The woman who once dominated headlines now struggled to defend her own record. Carson, calm and precise, stayed grounded in truth. His quiet authority proving that real strength doesn't need shouting. Sensing weakness, Roy pressed harder. He pointed out the irony. A politician claiming to fight poverty while benefiting from the same system she criticizes. The room shifted, you could feel it. That moment when arrogance meets exposure, when hypocrisy finally cracks. By the time the gavel hit, it wasn't Carson or Roy who looked shaken. It was Waters. Her legacy, decades in power with little change, now stood exposed. This wasn't humiliation by insult. It was humiliation by truth.
End quote. Simple question. Do you stand by that statement?
Simple answer. I am here today in this Rules Committee because we're taking up time with basically a non-issue. First of all, you claim that socialism has engulfed this country, that it keeps creeping, it's going to take over private businesses, et cetera, et cetera. That is not happening. We're in a democracy that we're trying very much to save and to not have disrupted, undermined in the way that.
So then reclaiming my time, the gentlelady denounces your previous statement then, and do not accept that previous statement that you think you would take over these
I'm not
private
a socialist.
businesses?
I'm a capitalist, and I commit to you that I am here to save Social Security, to save Medicare, to save seniors and veterans, and for some of you who have adopted certain kind of ways that you support what you now claim is socialism, I'm here to say to you, come on.
So this liberal will be all about socializing, will be all about basically taking over and the government running all of your companies. You disagree with that? You now denounce that statement.
I am not a socialist.
Okay.
All right?
So I appreciate the response. I think that to the extent that one has a concern as a member of this body or as an American watching this, one has concerns when we hear statements like this, and that's not the only one. And statements by some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle extolling the virtues of socialism, as I just pointed out. A nicer way of compensating businesses, a nicer way of confiscating the assets and the means of production. When now, as I think the gentleman from Kentucky was alluding to, in 1929, federal spending was 3% of GDP. At the height of COVID, 31% of GDP. In FY22, we collected a record $4.9 trillion in revenue, but still had a $1.4 trillion deficit. I think one question I would ask the chairman of Financial Services is, do you have full control over the means of production if you're a company in this country?
By the next morning, the footage had gone viral. Millions watched, shared, and debated what had taken place in that congressional hall. Some called it a reckoning. Others, the beginning of accountability. But for most Americans, it felt like a long overdue awakening. Dr. Ben Carson, a man who rose from poverty to become one of the world's top surgeons, had once again reminded the nation what dignity under pressure looks like.
But yet the government is regulating you so much that you cannot actually carry out the use of the capital for the purpose for which you have the company created. In other words, for example, ESG requirements. For example, maybe it's some of the USDA regulations requirements that prohibit small businesses from being able to crack into the monopolies that the gentlelady from New Mexico is referring to with respect to meat processing in this country. There are heavy USD regulations prohibiting that, as the gentleman from Kentucky has talked to. I'm happy to yield to him in a minute if he would like. We could go sit here for the next 5 days without adjourning. No, don't worry, Mr. Chairman, I'll do that. And go through a list of regulations that are impacting businesses in this country. So my question for the chairman is, do you have the full control over the means of production as a private citizen, business owner in our capitalistic system, if the government regulation is preventing you from being able to deploy that capital in the best means possible to carry out your business?
No. And this is what we're trying to address. We've seen major pieces of legislation rewrite our economy come through Congress and have failed. And then we see different actions that go through the regulatory state, independent agencies to write regulations, to achieve those outcomes through regulation. There is a move to make our banking system the arbiter of how you allocate capital to produce energy. There are various proposals in government agencies around achieving social goals. Social goals that they then put in place into business regulation that then controls the business outcome and their ability to actually get a return for the investors that own those businesses. So what we see here is the same intention of wholesale rewriting the economy, but through the independent agencies and the regulatory state. And so we'll bring legislation through the committee later in the Congress to address those challenges. And I think we can have a fulsome debate about whether or not that is actually achieving a better economic outcome or the stated objectives of those policies. But we need to get into those.
Once again, Carson proved that calm strength speaks louder than political noise. Chip Roy, fearless and principled, reminded the nation that courage still exists in Washington. Maxine Waters, untouchable for decades, finally faced the truth, not through insults but through facts. This moment wasn't about politics. It was about values, the line between service and self-interest. And as the echoes of that hearing continue to spread, one truth stands tall: integrity still matters. When it enters the room, corruption trembles.